Vince McMahon gets charged $10 million in court for reckless driving. Former WWE Chairman and Chief Operating Officer Vince McMahon has been charged with reckless driving in connection with a crash on a Connecticut highway in which he wrecked his Bentley and damaged two other cars, just hours before the death of former wrestler Hulk Hogan was announced. McMahon was charged with reckless driving and following too closely last Thursday morning while traveling on Merritt Parkway in Westport, the state police report stated. There were no injuries. He was released on $5 million bail and is scheduled to appear in Stamford Superior Court on August 26. Representatives for McMahon did not respond to emails seeking comment Wednesday morning. The police report states that McMahon was heading north on Route 15 when he rear-ended a BMW and crashed into a wooden guardrail. A car traveling in the opposite direction struck debris from the vehicles involved, state police added. There were no passengers in the vehicles, and all three drivers were wearing seat belts, the police department said. Airbags were deployed in McMahon's car. Under a sky heavy with headlines and rumor, the wrestling world is facing yet another storm, and this one doesn't come from the squared circle. In a stunning twist that has both shaken WWE loyalists and reignited media scrutiny around its controversial former figurehead, Vince McMahon, the longtime chairman and once revered architect of modern professional wrestling, finds himself at the center of a legal firestorm. According to state police reports released just hours before the death of wrestling icon Hulk Hogan stunned the globe, McMahon was officially charged with reckless driving and following too closely in a serious highway incident that involved multiple vehicles, millions in damage, and questions far deeper than the crash itself. It was supposed to be just another Thursday morning in Connecticut. Yet as dawn broke over the Merritt Parkway, known for its sweeping curves and historic charm, chaos briefly interrupted calm. Witnesses described a thunderous metallic screech, the type of sound that jerks you upright, followed by the sharp crack of splintering wood and a brief, but violent trail of smoke rising into the late summer air. Vince McMahon's black Bentley, a car synonymous with opulence and power, was crumpled like a paper shell against a wooden guardrail. A BMW, rear-ended by McMahon's vehicle, sat idle just yards ahead, the back end twisted from the impact. A third car, driving in the opposite lane, had been struck by flying debris, a cruel, incidental casualty in a morning that would change the narrative around one of wrestling's most powerful and polarizing men. Police on the scene worked quickly. No injuries were reported, and all involved had been wearing seatbelts. But as the dust settled, as McMahon stepped out of his vehicle with airbag powder clinging to his designer blazer and a blank stare beneath his famously rigid features, the reality began to crystallize. This wasn't just an accident. This was an indictment, not only on paper, but in public perception. State troopers charged him with reckless driving and following too closely, an accusation that, while nonviolent in nature, carries serious implications given the context and timing. The charge was made formal later that morning. McMahon was briefly detained, posted a staggering $5 million bail, and was released pending a court appearance scheduled for August 26 at Stamford Superior Court. A date that now looms over both McMahon and the company he once ruled with an iron fist. Within hours of the incident, speculation swirled. There were no official statements from McMahon's representatives. No apology. No press release. Silence, a silence that, for many, spoke volumes. What followed was a cascade of reactions online, from wrestling insiders, legal analysts, and WWE fans alike. Was McMahon under duress? Had he been drinking? Was there more to the crash than what the police were initially disclosing? Or was this simply the latest in a long line of lapses from a man many believe should have stepped away from the spotlight long ago? But what makes this moment even more haunting, even more cinematic in its cruelty, is what came after. Just hours after McMahon's Bentley was towed away from the crash site, draped under a blue tarp and surrounded by a wall of flashing lights, news broke from Tampa, Florida. Hulk Hogan, the man whose larger-than-life persona helped build the empire McMahon created, was gone. Dead at 71. Cardiac arrest. A legend extinguished. a titan of the industry laid low. And as tributes poured in for Hogan, fans couldn't help but see the contrast, the fallen hero versus the embattled mogul. Two men once joined at the hip, now linked again by tragedy, one by death, the other by disgrace. Inside WWE headquarters, the mood was described by sources as somber and disoriented. Staff members, still reeling from the news of Hogan's passing, were blindsided again when news outlets picked up the McMahon arrest report. The wrestling community, already shaken by loss, was forced to confront the return of another dark cloud. Vince McMahon had become the story again, not for building stars or launching WrestleMania, but for endangering lives on a public road in a moment of recklessness. And suddenly, just like that, the eulogies written for Hulk Hogan had to share ink with discussions of litigation, court proceedings, and public safety violations. As the police report circulated online, journalists began dissecting every detail. The statement was concise but damning. Vince McMahon was traveling northbound on Route 15 in Westport when, without sufficient distance or awareness, he collided into the back of a BMW. That car, according to investigators, had slowed down for traffic ahead. McMahon's Bentley, unable to stop in time, struck the BMW and veered into a wooden guardrail with enough force to splinter the barrier. Meanwhile, a car in the southbound lane, unsuspecting and unconnected, was hit by debris from the initial crash. It was, police confirmed, a miracle that no one was injured. But miracles don't always erase consequences. For McMahon, who has long weathered scandals with a chilling resilience, this time feels different. Because this isn't about a backstage lawsuit or corporate misstep. This is about public endangerment. Real lives. Real consequences. A man, in his late 70s, behind the wheel of a high-powered vehicle, careening into traffic in the same week that the world bid farewell to one of his closest collaborators. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The court documents offered little comfort. Released on bail, McMahon's conditions include mandatory court supervision, a restriction on operating high-performance vehicles until further notice, and a commitment to comply with Connecticut's traffic laws pending trial. Legal analysts predict that while the charges are misdemeanors, the circumstances, including the high-profile nature of the defendant, could result in heavier penalties if prosecutors seek to make an example of him. And with the national spotlight already fixed on the incident, there's every chance that might be the case. Behind closed doors, WWE staff are said to be bracing for impact. Though McMahon no longer holds official day-to-day power within the company, his influence and his proximity to decision-makers remains a source of anxiety. Several sponsors, according to sources close to the company, have reached out requesting reassurances that McMahon's legal situation will not impact WWE programming, events, or its public image. One internal memo reviewed by a wrestling outlet reportedly instructed staff to refer all McMahon-related inquiries to corporate legal. No spin. No denial. Just silence, the kind that usually precedes restructuring or distance. Meanwhile, those who know Vince best remain tight-lipped. Former WWE talent, now retired or working in adjacent industries, have declined to comment. Some, behind anonymity, have called the incident sad but inevitable. Others suggest McMahon has long been surrounded by enablers who feared telling him no on business, on family, or, apparently, on the road. He's always lived like the rules don't apply to him, said one former executive who worked with McMahon for over a decade. He thought he was untouchable. Maybe now he'll realize that's not true. What remains undeniable is the timing. For many fans, Hulk Hogan represented the beginning of an era. The golden age of wrestling. A time when kayfabe was sacred and heroes wore red and yellow. And Vince? He was the puppeteer. The mastermind. The ringmaster of it all. The two men were both products of and architects of a time in wrestling history that shaped generations. Now, in the span of a few hours, one has left this earth while the other prepares to stand before a judge. It reads like fiction. But it's happening in real time. The ripple effects are already being felt. Social media erupted with reactions, not just about McMahon's legal troubles, but about what this means for WWE's legacy. Threads trended under hashtags like #McMahonCrash and #WWE Some users joked that it was karma. Others called for his permanent removal from the company in any form. A few diehard defenders urged for patience and cautioned against jumping to conclusions. But the consensus was clear. This incident isn't going away quietly. And then, there's the question of legacy. Vince McMahon has spent over 4 decades constructing an empire where perception is reality. He's rewritten his own history on live television, reinvented villains as saviors, and shaped narratives with the precision of a novelist. But this story, this real-world story, may be one he can't control. The crash, the charges, the bail, the court date. They are written in legal ink, not creative script. And no matter how many press teams, PR advisors, or brand managers weigh in, the footage of that mangled Bentley on the Merritt Parkway will remain a symbol burned into the public psyche. Back in Stamford, just a few miles from WWE headquarters, court officials are preparing for what may become a high-profile appearance unlike any they've handled in years. Security is expected to be tight. Cameras will no doubt swarm the courthouse steps. And McMahon, a man who once walked the grandest stages in the world with unparalleled swagger, will be forced to answer for his actions not in a wrestling ring, but in a courtroom under oath. And as August 26th approaches, the world waits. Not just for justice, but for accountability. For answers. For some form of reckoning from a man who, for better or worse, changed the landscape of global entertainment. Will McMahon issue a statement? Will he fight the charges? Will WWE finally sever its public ties to the man who once defined it? Or will this become yet another chapter in a legacy already soaked in controversy? Only time and the court will tell. In the days following Vince McMahon's crash on the Merritt Parkway, the air surrounding WWE headquarters thickened with tension. What had started as a routine traffic incident now threatened to spiral into something far more damaging. Not only was McMahon charged, but the incident coincided with a week of mourning. A week in which fans, former wrestlers, and executives were still grappling with the death of Hulk Hogan. The juxtaposition between Hogan's memorials and McMahon's mugshot told a story that even WWE's creative team couldn't script, a story of finality, of endings, and perhaps of overdue consequences. Behind the pristine, corporate glass of WWE's Stamford office, leadership meetings stretched into the late hours. Though Nick Khan and Paul Levesque, Triple H, had taken on primary executive roles in recent years, Vince McMahon's shadow still loomed. Even in semi-retirement, even without official power, his name still echoed in high-level discussions. Executives now had to balance 2 competing legacies, honoring Hogan, who brought wrestling to millions of homes, and distancing themselves from McMahon, the man who orchestrated it all, and may now bring shame to everything he built. Outside the company walls, media scrutiny intensified. Reporters filed FOIA requests for dash-cam footage. Local news crews camped along the Merritt Parkway, eager to film the scene of the crash for B-roll. Rumors began to circulate about the cause. Was McMahon speeding? Was he texting? Was he mentally fit to drive? Though the police report ruled out drugs and alcohol, the question of recklessness remained central. And that word, reckless, began to take on multiple meanings. For wrestling fans, reckless wasn't just a legal charge. It became a metaphor. Reckless with talent. Reckless with power. Reckless with legacy. Old interviews resurfaced, clips of McMahon belittling employees on live TV, making controversial statements during press conferences, and brushing off criticism with his trademark bravado. Memes circulated showing his mugshot next to famous WWE villains. Mr. McMahon, once a caricature of corporate tyranny, was now seen by some as a reflection of real life. But perhaps the most painful reaction came from within the locker room. Several current WWE superstars, according to sources who spoke anonymously, were deeply disappointed by the incident. One top-tier talent reportedly told a colleague, "First Hogan dies, now this?" Feels like the whole house of cards is shaking. Another said McMahon's arrest reopened old wounds, memories of backstage toxicity, questionable decisions, and unchecked control that many believed had been put to rest when Vince stepped back from active leadership. And yet, here he was again, not by choice, but by force of law. In public statements, WWE remained cautious. A spokesperson issued a brief comment: Mr. McMahon's current legal matters are separate from WWE business operations. We will not be issuing further statements at this time. It was carefully worded. Cold. Intentionally detached. Designed to send a message: Vince McMahon is not us. Not anymore. And yet the wrestling world doesn't operate in isolation. Fans see the ring, the screen, the stories, but they also see the man behind the machine. And Vince, whether retired or not, remains inseparable from the product in the eyes of many. His fingerprints are on every WrestleMania. His voice lingers in the cadence of every backstage promo. His ambition built the global brand, and now his recklessness threatened to stain it permanently. Meanwhile, legal experts began analyzing the case on cable news and YouTube legal breakdowns. The charge of reckless driving, while not a felony, carries serious implications, especially when compounded by high financial stakes, public endangerment, and potential prior infractions. Though McMahon has no known criminal driving history, prosecutors may argue a pattern of behavior, citing past allegations of impulsivity, disregard for rules, and an obsession with power at all costs. A $5 million bail, though pocket change for a billionaire, was symbolic. Judges don't assign such figures lightly. It reflected not just the damage done, but the perceived risk of recurrence, the idea that McMahon, left unchecked, might endanger more than just a BMW and a guardrail. It spoke to the weight of accountability finally being placed on shoulders that had carried too much unchecked influence for too long. And amid the chaos, there was silence from McMahon himself. No apology. No comment. No remorse. Just as it had been when sexual misconduct allegations surfaced. Just as it had been when questions about creative control and backstage culture dominated headlines. McMahon had always followed a simple creed: say nothing, act bigger. But this time, that silence rang louder. It wasn't defiance. It was absence. The world was speaking about him, around him, and against him, and he had nothing left to say. In parallel, tributes to Hulk Hogan continued to pour in. A public memorial service was announced in Tampa Bay, and WWE began preparing a tribute show. Superstars filmed personal messages. Archival footage was compiled. Music cues were tested for maximum emotional impact. The company wanted to honor its fallen legend, to give him the send-off he deserved. But the McMahon crash cast a shadow even here. Fans online criticized the timing. Some questioned why WWE hadn't made a more definitive break from McMahon. Others wondered if his scandal would taint Hogan's farewell. For decades, the stories of McMahon and Hogan were intertwined, creator and creation. Now, their fates diverged in stark fashion. Hogan passed as a beloved, if complicated, icon. McMahon stumbled deeper into the realm of disgrace. And the wrestling universe, so often scripted, found itself in the throes of a real-life drama more chaotic than anything written for the ring. By the end of the week, photographers caught McMahon leaving his Manhattan apartment. Dressed in all black, with sunglasses covering tired eyes, he ignored questions from the press. "Do you have anything to say to your fans?" one reporter shouted. McMahon didn't flinch. Another called out, "Are you stepping away from WWE for good?" No answer. He stepped into the back of a black SUV and drove off into the crowd of flashing cameras, chased not by wrestlers, but by consequence. As court day approaches, whispers grow louder. There are rumors that WWE may be pressured to release a formal statement distancing themselves further. Some believe McMahon may attempt a quiet exit from any remaining business roles. Others expect he'll try to fight back legally, publicly, perhaps even defiantly. But whatever happens next, the image is already set. A broken Bentley, a destroyed guardrail, a man once seen as untouchable now undeniably human, fallible, reckless, and caught. This wasn't the storyline Vince McMahon wrote for himself, but it may be the one he'll be remembered by. Across the wrestling world, conversations about Vince McMahon's future began to take a sharper turn. It was no longer just a matter of court appearances or PR damage control. It was now a deeper reckoning with legacy, power, and whether a man who once stood at the summit of global sports entertainment had finally crossed the threshold into irredeemable territory. Within WWE, certain senior voices were said to be lobbying for a complete internal separation, not merely distancing in name, but the formal revocation of all honorary titles, stockholder influence, and creative consultation. The logic was simple. In an era where image and accountability are currency, the company could not afford the ongoing shadow of a man spiraling in real time. WWE had rebranded itself successfully over the last 2 years. New stars, progressive storylines, social media transparency, an emphasis on family friendliness. But Vince's arrest felt like a throwback to the chaos of another era. One where unchecked control and personal indulgence overrode every other concern. A time of cover-ups, whispered settlements, and an unshakable belief that no matter what he did, McMahon would always land on his feet. But this time, the fall felt steeper. The safety net seemed thinner. And the crowd wasn't cheering. While WWE worked behind the scenes, the Stamford Superior Court prepared for what insiders were calling the most high-profile traffic trial in the state's recent memory. McMahon's legal team, known for defending high-powered executives in complex litigation, began assembling a case that leaned heavily on his health history, cognitive evaluations, and psychological stress leading up to the incident. One source familiar with the Def.